amazing tech leaders that we have that are Canadian, that are spread out, and I'm hoping to also help us make sure those nodes and connections that we have as a group beyond just, the wall that Donald Trump's going to build for Canada and US. I want it to be a strong group. So Ahmad is the VP of Engineering at Mashape. He spends a lot of time talking about technology and leadership and really thinking about how to adapt all the things that are that we're dealing with in a community way. That's kind of my synthesis of my chats with Ahmad. So without further ado, Ahmad Nassri.
Thank you. All right, I'm here to talk to you about something that everybody enjoys talking about, which is development methodologies. And I'm actually hopefully going to make it less boring. First of all, a little bit of introduction. Thank you, Boris. My name is Ahmad Nassri. I work for a company called Mashape. It's based out of the Valley in San Francisco. We have offices all around. Previously, I worked at the CBC, I led the development team there, and I'm part of a number of organizations and things around Toronto and Canada in general. Tech Masters is the biggest development community in Toronto online based on Slack. Please join us and we have a lot of cool conversations online, talk about tech, talk about business and startups. Full Stack Toronto is a great conference that I'm on the board of, and a few other things as well. So open development methodology is this project that I'm working on. It's just a theory that I'm putting together, collecting learnings and lessons from different industries, different technologies, different experiences that I've had and other people have had around how do we do software development. And I want to clarify something in terms of definition. I'm talking about methodology, not process. So this is something, I wrote a couple of articles about this online. A lot of Agile kind of defenders and a little bit of fanatics came on board and started a bit of a war online about this. I'm not talking about process, I'm talking about methodology. And methodology to me is just the foundations and the principles that govern how do you actually approach something. And then you can put a process around it. And remember, at the end of the day, all we want to do as developers in technology is just get shit done. And this is our focus ourselves as the leaders of developers, but also as developers too. We just want to go there, get the project done, build the product, and go from there. So software development in general talks about many different topics, touches on many different things, many different professions even. It's not just programming. There's design, there's user experience, there's marketing, there's client relationship. There's all these things that end up being part of the software development world. And lots of these things end up being a big, messy subject to kind of cover. There's things that we invented called processes and methodologies that hopefully address some of these things, whether it's waterfall, Agile, Scrum, name your poison, go with it. But it's important to remember that most of these things are theoretical, and almost every methodology or process starts with the tagline of, this is a theoretical process, it works in theory, you need to adapt it to your team, to your culture, to your product, however you want to build things. And again, at the end of the thing, you just want to get shit done. You're not really as interested in the actual process as much as you're interested in the outcome. And your outcome is a product, it's a service, whatever it is you're working on. So let me tell you a little bit about my team. This is our company. There's a bit of a delay on a lot of a delay. Okay. Oh. There we go. This is our company. This was one of the very short moments we had everybody from around the world in one place, and this still wasn't everybody in the company. And these are our clients. You've seen the show Silicon Valley, the kind of startup culture and startup mindset. There's a lot of smart people. We're building development tools for developers. Our main kind of focus is on API tools and products. I'm not going to get into that. We can talk about that later. But the companies and the clients we serve are developers themselves. What that means is they're smart people. They're sometimes bigger than us. They're better than us in terms of building software. So they always challenge us, not only in terms of our products and services, but also in the way we do work. So that just puts a lot of pressure on us to make sure that what we deliver is the highest quality and can fit all these clients. Our team right now is spread across 7 cities. We speak 8 different languages in total. Obviously, we all speak English as well, but it's not our native tongue. It's not my native tongue. We work across 6 time zones, and we actually come from 11 different nationalities altogether. So this is important because, and as Farhan said, like when you pair a program and where you work together as part of a team, you have to make sure that you're able to communicate properly with the team. So whether you have a language barrier, whether you have a cultural barrier, whether you have a time zone barrier, all these things add up and all these things become part of the challenges that you have to solve. So no longer is a problem just writing code and building products, you're also making sure you're building team and building culture around it. And I've seen this problem in many different places across different past lives and different kind of projects that I'm involved in. For example, at the CBC, we were all based in Toronto, but we were still serving different provinces and teams across the country. And even on the same building, we have all these departments, so we weren't even communicating very well with each other. It's hard to even get from floor 10 to floor 5 and actually meet with a team that's actually you're delivering the work for. So all these things play into it. And again, at the end of the day, we just wanted to get shit done. So I looked at the open source community, and the open source community is very interesting to me because of many reasons, obviously from a technology point of view, but also from building products and services. So let me ask you here in the crowd, who here does not use open source? Great. This is a trick question, because everything we do is based on open source, whether it's software technology or whether it's hardware, whether it's the chips that's in the projector, projecting the screen, it's all part of what we do. And whether we actually are contributing to open source or whether we're involved in open source in any way, we're still clients and users of it. So when you look at the open source community, you have the entire world taking part. And you have all these big companies and all these big names obviously building products and services around open source. So just as an interesting metric, the Linux kernel alone had 4,000 contributors just in this last year. Now, these are not always 4,000 people working on Linux kernel at the same time, but whether it's one line of code, whether it's a whole feature or a whole bug fix or a completely new rewrite or refactor, these things take time. They need to be documented, they need to be tested, there's a whole slew of communication back and forth between hundreds and sometimes thousands of people just to get that one line of code into the code base and release it. And the surprising thing is, if you haven't noticed, all the open source projects that are massively successful are always delivered on time. They have the best quality. They are usually the standard at which we set our own software development at work against. And they really are the paving the way for us in terms of how do we do software development, from specs, from technology, from everything else. So how do these teams do it? They're not getting together and pair programming. Some of them do, but not all the time. They're not necessarily following Agile or Waterfall or TDD or any other methodology per se, but they do follow a set of principles and set of foundations that kind of govern how they get shit done. And these are the kind of the core tenets that I found around these kind of open source teams that end up being very well translated into an organization and into a team working on, not open source, not free software. But they hold true nevertheless. So let's talk about some of these things. Focus on quality. Again, whether you're a developer or a designer or a business leader or a marketer, at the end of the day, everybody wants to have a good quality product, right? Whether it's the quality of the lines of code you're writing, or is it the quality of the actual user experience you're producing, or is it the quality of the whole team performance, right? There's always the focus on quality. And this is, you see something this in the open source community, people come together around an open source project, not only because they're users of it, not only because they need it for their work, but also because they feel that there's quality here that they can actually either leverage or contribute to. And I love this quote. Always quote as if the guy who ends up maintaining your code will be a psychopath that knows where you live. It's both motivational, but also true in terms of setting a standard for yourself. And if you don't want to have a psychopath knocking on your door, basically. Documentation, and this is kind of a touchy subject for developers and development teams because developers don't like to write documentation, but also it goes beyond just technology and developers in general, designers as well. Marketing process, sales process, you name it. If it's not written down, it's not documented. And if it's not documented, then how is the next person going to come in and do it? And I bet you, like Farhan will also speak about this in terms of pair programming, it's not just putting two people together and here you go, off you go. There's tons of documentation, there's tons of resources, there's tons of information that has to be digested in order for a person to be able to get started and be able to contribute and become productive. That's a fun quote as well. And the thing about documentation that gets lost in processes like Agile and Waterfall and things is that the focus is on the delivery. It does not necessarily focus on quality, even though it's championed as part of the Agile mindset. It's the focus on the delivery. And the delivery ends up, in a lot of cases, and obviously that's not the goal, but in a lot of cases ends up being time frames. And the time frames mean, in a lot of cases, oh, skip the documentation, it doesn't matter. We can do it later as long as we have the product. But what happens is at the next iteration, because you don't have the documentation, things get lost and things don't end up being produced well. Another core aspect of how open source projects and open source team get things done is through having an open discussion. Now what this means is, it's not just the developers going together and talking openly about the technology. It's not just the designers going together and talking openly about the user experience. It's everybody talking together about everything. And you see this in the open source world where, take any random project like WordPress. You go to the WordPress open source repository, look at the tickets and the issues. It's not just programmers discussing things. It's actually end users. It's people who know nothing about programming going in there and asking questions, providing feedback, giving ideas, suggestions, what have you, because they're part of that community. So you end up having this community effect where everybody's contributing to any different varying degrees that they can. So developers can contribute, designers can contribute, business leaders can contribute. Everybody has their own 2 cents in, and it becomes an open discussion where everybody can actually provide value. And with the examples earlier, when you have senior people and junior people coming together and actually having this discussion without any barriers, a lot of times, a lot of great ideas surface from somebody who may not be as experienced or may not be as versed in the product or service, but just because they're thinking outside the box, it helps. Testing. Again, this is a topic that ends up generally being directed towards developer and development. It's not just for software, it's also for design. You want to test your design. So whether that's doing A/B testing, whether that's doing users feedback and doing focus groups, you want to test your business cases, you want to test your sales models, you want to test everything. And again, you see this in the open source world where people actually release software or release products into release candidates, get feedback, get the community to contribute, and then take that feedback and go with it. And in a lot of cases, you've seen this all the time in open source, people may release something and then take it away because the community didn't like it. That's part of the test. Right? It's not just writing code tests. It's actually engaging with the customer, having them try what you've built, and then take that learning and do something with it. Transparency is a big part of the open source. And this often gets confused with discussion. Like, it's not just having an open discussion, but also being transparent. Being transparent about your intent, being transparent about your business, being transparent about your model, what you're trying to achieve. And you see this a lot in big corporate culture where you have behind the door meetings that end up deciding what directions to go, what things to do, and often enough business leaders would say, developers and the software development team doesn't need to worry about, the financial model or the business direction or the client kind of relationship. That's somebody else's problem. But in a lot of cases, and you've probably seen this as yourself, having people who may be the designer, the developer, the project manager, be part of that conversation and having that conversation be transparent to them, a lot of the cases ends up being where these folks can actually contribute to it, whether directly or indirectly, having small feedback, providing a little bit of information, or even just affecting their morale and affecting the way they contribute to their own project and to their own product that they're building. This is probably the biggest and most important thing, and this is where I want to talk to Farhan a lot about pair programming and asynchronicity, because for me, life is asynchronous, and life works in an asynchronous fashion. You can take a team and say, okay, now you're going to do Agile. You're going to work 9 to 5, you're going to have every day stand up, you're going to do the following things in the following order, in the following fashion. You can do pair programming. You can say, okay, everybody needs to work together with certain hours. But the reality is, as human beings, we have different productivity levels, we have different ways of solving problems, we have different ways of communicating, obviously, but it doesn't always necessarily align with other individuals. Sometimes it does, which is great, but not all the time. And especially if you have a distributed team, how do you solve that problem of being asynchronous all the time? And if you have, even probably as most of these companies here, you have global customers, how do you have that kind of communication and asynchronicity problem when your customers may be in a completely different time zone than you, and you don't have that ability to instantly react to what they're saying? And you see this in the open source world. When people make a pull request, when they ask a question, they don't expect an answer immediately. So this might provide a bit of a challenge in terms of timelines and delivery, but it's an interesting thought process to think about of, okay, how do I make things happen and ask questions, gain information, get knowledge from other people in the company, but not affect timelines, not affect delivery, at the same time not having to have an instantaneous answer. Democracy is probably a controversial topic, as this thing is also frozen. Trying again. There you go. Democracy. If you have an open communication, if you are transparent in your intent and how you want to deliver your product or your business, if you have teams that are collaborating together and working together, then there is no reason that democracy wouldn't work. And this is scary for a lot of business owners and business leaders when they say, no, it's my business, it's my product, it's my company, I want to decide where this goes. But often enough, you see a lot of the ideas, a lot of the innovation happens from the bottom up, not the other way around. So democracy doesn't just mean everybody gets to vote and your vote just populist count ends up leading the way. It just means people have a say. And when people have a say, they feel ownership, they feel involved, and they feel part of the process. There's a couple of resources that are interesting. The CEO of Red Hat, Jim Whitehurst, released a book last year called The Open Organization, talking about how do you have this mindset in your organization beyond just what I'm talking about, which is software development. And apparently just yesterday, or 2 days ago, he released another book, follow-up to that, called The Catalyst in Chief, and it's specifically talking about operational aspects of the open organization. Haven't read this one yet, but I'm assuming it's going to be as good as the first one, so it's probably, I would recommend that as well. There's a group called the To-Do Group. It's actually a number of companies that come together and are working around the open source mindset of what tooling, what processes, what products can there be done or built for software development teams to make sure that people are not only contributing to open source, but also adopting the open source tools and mindset into their organization as well. So these are companies like GitHub, Google, Microsoft, pretty much everybody in the tech industry is working on this. And again, just a reminder, it's everybody's goal at the end of the day is just to get shit done. And all these processes and methodologies are just means to an end. So I don't come to the table with answers. If you've noticed, I'm just proposing ideas and asking questions. And the goal here is to actually make this in itself an open source project. So I want you and I want everybody in the community to contribute and collaborate on defining what an open development methodology is. How do we work together in a distributed fashion? How do we work together in a synchronous fashion? It's not me just telling you, it's the whole community coming together and discussing it. There's a big discussion group online on GitHub for the project that I started that people are just talking and discussing, asking questions. There's a Slack group that we started. People are discussing it as well. And I would love to have you guys involved and just work together to make software great again. That's it. Thank you.